What's up, everybody? Welcome to this episode of the Man Cave Podcast, brought to you by Hy-Vee and Toyson Ford. Dan Casper here with you, as always, for every episode of the Man Cave Podcast. We're going to talk some more football. We got a 5x5 coming at you. My 5 reasons why the Packers will win or can win on Saturday against the 49ers. And probably a little easier, the 5 reasons why they won't win. That's coming up. But wildcard round's officially in the books, baby. We've got divisional rounds to get to. And that's where we're going to lead off with this episode of the Man Cave Podcast. Wildcard round in the books. Now we focus on the divisional round here for the postseason. Houston taking on Baltimore, Green Bay visiting San Francisco, Tampa Bay visiting Detroit, and Kansas City taking on the Buffalo Bills. Out of all those matchups, I think the one that is probably the least surprising, or if we asked you to make some picks at the beginning of the year for the divisional round, Buffalo and Kansas City might be the only one that people would have picked, or maybe would have been least surprised about if we would have go back in time and hop in our DeLoreans and all that stuff and be like, hey, this is divisional round matchups. What are your thoughts? And people would probably laugh at a couple of these or say, what are you drinking early this morning and all that stuff. But that is definitely going to be the matchup that is probably going to get the most attention, the most fanfare heading into this upcoming weekend. Another matchup between Kansas City and Buffalo. Finally, Patrick Mahomes going on the road, hitting the road here for a postseason game and such. Buffalo pretty banged up on that defensive side there too, though. So I don't know how that's going to play out. But, you look at these other ones, and that's – do they have an early line? Let me see if they've got an early line on this game right now. Buffalo 2.5, it looks like the spread that I'm looking at. So, pretty darn even, pretty close to being even over there. But nonetheless, these other matchups, not to say that people are surprised that San Francisco or Baltimore or even Detroit's in there. It's just the teams that they're playing at this particular time. But, when I look at these matchups here, the Elite Eight or the Final Four in each conference, however we want to term it, outside of that Kansas City and Buffalo game, matchup-wise, I think there's some storylines to kind of follow throughout these. The wild card weekend, you kept hearing about, there's storylines for almost every single game. The script writers are having themselves a night, just might as well give them the Emmys and all that sort of stuff for best script writing or whatever. Maybe not as much for some of these games. I'm kind of looking at maybe the Tampa and Detroit one and struggling to kind of come up with something there. But, at least Houston and Baltimore, you've got, C.J. Stroud and this young resurgent Texans team, a Texans team that was dead last just last year or close to dead last. They had the second overall pick. And you look at the last couple of years, and it has been just awful, awful, awful stuff. They were recycling through coaches after every single year. They started to turn the tide by bringing in DeMeco Ryans to, really change that culture, and he's done a fantastic job. He would have my vote for Coach of the Year. And then you look at C.J. Stroud, and you see how the Texans were aggressive on draft night. Trading back up and getting Will Anderson. There's revisiting that draft. There was a lot of talk. Could they go quarterback? Could they maybe bypass quarterback and maybe get Will Levis later on in the first round? Nope, they moved up, and they got their top 2 targets right away in the draft and building blocks for this franchise, and they have skyrocketed, over-exceeded expectations for this year. So a young and exciting Houston Texans team that is visiting a very exciting, a little bit more of a veteran-led Baltimore Ravens team, a team that a lot of people assume would say that is the best right now in the NFL. And for my vote, if I were to power rank them, Baltimore would be probably number 1 for me at this point in time. So you got a little bit of storylines there. obviously the Kansas City and Buffalo one going on over there. Green Bay and San Francisco, their storylines there. Again, the history between these two, LaFleur and Shanahan, right? All the familiarity between those two guys. LaFleur, a long time Kyle Shanahan disciple. Can LaFleur, can the Packers somehow upset the 49ers in the postseason? The 49ers, who have been a team that has had success against Green Bay in the postseason. A lot as of late. Green Bay's won some regular season games, a couple here and there, but when it's come to the postseason, seems like whether it's Jim Harbaugh or Kyle Shanahan at this point in time, it's been the 49ers' advantage. And when you look at this 49ers team offensively, at least, perhaps the most balanced offensive team in the entire league. I mean, you've got Brock Purdy, who threw for over 4,000 yards this year, is an MVP candidate. Christian McCaffrey led the league in rushing yards, over 1,400. You've got, receiving-wise, 2 receivers, counting a tight end. Okay, let me rephrase. 1 receiver over 1,000 yards, and it's not Deebo Samuel. It's Brandon Ayuk. I feel like Brandon Ayuk has kind of been maybe a little overshadowed this year, maybe overlooked just because of all the talent on the offensive side of things for the 49ers. Over 1,300 receiving yards. George Kittle, over 1,000 yards receiving too. So you got a 49ers team, and then Deebo Samuel's 892 receiving yards over there. So, I mean, you've got a 49ers team that's got a quarterback that threw for over 4,000 yards, a running back that ran for over 1,400 yards, a receiver that caught over 1,300 yards receiving, and a tight end over 1,000 yards. You look at rankings from the regular season statistically, incredibly well balanced for this San Francisco 49ers offense. You're talking number 4 in passing, number 3 in rushing, number 2 overall in total yards. Going to be a very, very tough test for that Packers defense going up against the 49ers. But you got storylines, right? You got stuff to follow there. It's, Lions and Tampa Bay is maybe the one that maybe struggle a little bit to find some common themes in there. But, Lions right now, I think are probably, when you look at this, if you don't have a horse in the race, if you don't have a team to kind of root for when it gets to the postseason, you probably have a lot of people hitching their wagon to the Detroit Lions right now. Kind of America's 2024 postseason team, if you will, at this point in time. So, but Baker Mayfield, C.J. Stroud, Jordan Love. Look at some of these quarterbacks. Who would have thunk at the beginning of the season these would be guys in the Final Four in their respective conferences right now? Not the Cowboys, not Dak Prescott, not Jalen Hurts, not those guys. It's some of these youngsters and maybe some resurgent projects. Even throw Jared Goff in there, too, if you want to talk about kind of a little resurgence at this point in time. So, but I think what so far these wild card matchups, what a lot of these games, and it's not to say it always works out this way, but I think what a lot of these games showed us is, again, just how much momentum and how well you are playing at the end of the season really affects how you go into this postseason. Can you, riding that momentum? If you're playing some of your best ball or you're playing some really good football heading into the postseason, or I'm a big believer in momentum, so I think it's for any sport, but I think you look at some of these matchups or look at some of these results from the wild card weekend. You look at these winners, and you kind of look at how they ended their regular season, and you're like, yep, that team, they were playing really well. They were riding that wave, and they got in. And they won their first game. Houston Texans. Look at the last couple of games. Titans. They came off that loss against the Browns, but they didn't have C.J. Stroud in there. So they come back and dominate the Titans in their second to final week. And then they beat the Colts in a win and get in situation. C.J. Stroud's been playing incredibly well. Really good football. Probably going to be the offensive rookie of the year. But riding that momentum. Riding that wave. You look at, heck, even Tampa Bay. I know they kind of sluggish game against Carolina in that final game of the season, but you kind of look at their matchup against Green Bay, and that's kind of when things are like, oh, okay, Tampa Bay, hey now. Baker goes into Lambeau Field and puts on a perfect quarterback rating. They were that stretch, Panthers, Falcons, Packers, Jaguars, all wins. They lose the Saints there. They squeak out a victory against the Panthers. But they were playing some of their best football at the end of the regular season, the final month and a half. And then, we know Green Bay. We know the numbers. Turning point was, whether it was the Chargers or the Thanksgiving Day game against the Lions, playing their best football down the stretch. The final month and a half, final couple months of the season, riding that momentum into the postseason, and they pick up a big win. And then you look at a team like the Eagles, playing their worst football. Playing their absolute worst football, and they get trounced in the wild card round. Dominated. I mean, I'm not a body language expert. I just follow the Twitter experts out there who think they're body language experts. But there definitely was a lot of chit-chat about during that game last night about you could just, for a lot of people, they could tell, like, nope. Philly didn't look like they wanted to be there. Nah, they didn't look like they wanted to be there. And again, momentum-wise, Buffalo. They were supposed to be dead. Out of it. Heck, even going to the final game, they could have been out of it. Now, they got a little help throughout the day before their matchup that Sunday night, but there was that scenario opening up on Sunday like, hey, lose, they could be out. Win, they could be the 2 seed. And they looked like they were potentially going to be out. And what'd they do? They rattled off wins against the Chiefs, the Cowboys, the Chargers, the Patriots, and the Dolphins to get into the postseason. Momentum. Playing your best ball at the end of the season. It's never... How you start is a big factor. You want to start off on a good note. Absolutely, you don't want to dig yourself into holes when you begin seasons. But it's how you're playing down the stretch. How you're playing leading in to the postseason. That is such a huge factor. I'm a big believer in that. I know there's some people out there who don't buy the momentum argument. Don't buy, how well they're playing heading into the postseason. I think if you look at the wild card round this year, you can see a lot more examples of how much momentum means than it doesn't. And maybe that's the biggest chance that a team like Green Bay has going up against the 49ers. Can Green Bay continue to ride that momentum, continue to ride that confidence they're building? Can they continue to play some amazing football and go into San Francisco and pick up another upset? That might be the biggest factor for Green Bay, or the biggest reason maybe Green Bay goes in there and gets the upset for a second straight week. Is that momentum that they got going on right now? Is that groove that they're in here? And it's not to say San Francisco's not on it either, because when they went through that stretch, where they lost 3 games in a row, Browns, Vikings, Bengals, things were looking down. People were already like, oh boy, Brock Purdy, what's going on with him? What's going on with the 49ers? What'd they do? What'd they do after that 3-game losing streak? Well, they rattle off a 6-game winning streak, beating Jaguars, Buccaneers, Seahawks, Eagles, Seahawks, Cardinals. Then they get dominated by the Ravens in that game, come back and beat the Commanders, and then pretty much sit everybody for that final game against the Rams. But if there's one thing that this wild card round, I think, kind of proved is how big of a factor momentum and how well you're playing in that final month of the season. That really is a big kind of, we can break down the numbers, we can break down statistics, we can break down all this stuff. The one thing you can't have these advanced metrics for and these grades and these rankings for is confidence, momentum. That's just within. And a lot of these teams feel like that's why it's propelling them to pick up some of these big wins. Let's take a quick break, and coming up next, the 5x5. My top 5 reasons why the Packers will win the game on Saturday, and the 5 reasons they will lose to the 49ers. That's coming up after these quick words. It's that time of year where we may be stuck indoors for a bit, so you need to make sure your pantries, fridge, and freezers are fully stocked. How do you do that while also saving some money? Easy. Just shop at Hy-Vee in Eau Claire. Whether it's stocking the pantry with soups or dried goods, or loading up the deep freezer with pizzas and frozen foods, Hy-Vee has the best selection to help keep you stocked during the winter months. And with their Hy-Vee perks, you'll save money at the register and the gas pump. Stock up on your favorite grocery items and save money with Hy-Vee in Eau Claire. Winter is here in the Chippewa Valley, which means it's even more important to make sure you have a good vehicle to hit the winter roads of Wisconsin. Need that vehicle for this winter season? Look no further than Toyson Ford in Chippewa Falls. Whether it's a car, truck, or SUV from their new or used inventory, Toyson Ford has the vehicle you're looking for. Making sure you have a good, proper working vehicle is incredibly important this winter season, and Toyson Ford knows that. Just give them a visit today at 1000 Chippewa Crossing Boulevard and visit ToysonFord.com. Time for the 5x5. 5 reasons why the Packers will win on Saturday. 5 reasons why they won't, besides the clearly obvious ones of outscoring each other. So when you look at this 49ers team and you look at what they've done in the regular season and you look at some of the numbers that they put up offensively, and you're like, dang, you got a quarterback that's thrown for over 4,000 yards. You've got a running back that led the league in rushing, over 1,400 yards rushing. You've got a tight end over 1,000 yards receiving. You got a receiver that went over 1,000 yards, went over 1,300 yards receiving. And no, it wasn't Deebo Samuel. It was Brandon Ayuk, who I believe kind of maybe flew under the radar here a little bit, because I think if you ask a lot of people to name some of the playmakers or some offensive players on the 49ers, you're going to say Christian McCaffrey, you're going to say George Kittle, you're going to say Brock Purdy, you're going to say Deebo Samuel, and you're like, oh yeah, forgot about Brandon Ayuk. Dude went out there and caught 75 balls for 1,342 yards, averaged nearly 84 yards per game this year. Yeah, he's over there too. Juszczyk, one of the better fullbacks, if not the best fullback in the league. They got weapons. And they're well balanced. Kyle Shanahan and that entire offensive staff does a fantastic job of getting them involved, staying balanced, keeping teams guessing. Right? So you look at this and you're like, boy, that's tough. Not to mention perhaps maybe the best left tackle in the game, of Trent Williams over there too. So it's definitely a tough task. And they got a pretty solid defense over there too. A lot of the focus is on their offense, and rightfully so. Pretty solid on defense too. Steve Wilkes is getting some head coaching interviews. It seems like that's the one thing that is, I shouldn't say one thing, that's one of the many things that's impressed me a lot about Kyle Shanahan is I think this is his 3rd defensive coordinator, because guys just get head coaching jobs. Robert Saleh was his first one, DeMeco Ryans, and goes outside and brings in Steve Wilkes. I know there's a little bit of adjustment there, but for the most part, I mean, you're talking about yards allowed per game, top 10. Passing yards allowed per game, they're about middle of the pack there. Rushing yards allowed per game, 3rd best. Points allowed per game, 3rd best. So, I mean, and Fred Warner's on defense. We know about Bosa and Chase Young when they made that trade and such. So, they got players. They got players. So this is a very big task at the hand for the Packers. But there are maybe, as they may be small, but maybe a couple of cracks in the foundation when you're trying to, the Bill Belichick approach of like, okay, trying to maybe limiting what they do best. And in the 49ers case, there's offensively, there's not a whole lot that they don't do very good, but maybe there's a couple of ways you could really try to expose this. And I think that's if you're Green Bay and you're sitting in those coaching meetings and staff meetings and coming up with your game plans. There may be a couple of things to try to really expose. But first, I think the main, maybe not the main, but the top reason or top way to come away with a victory or to improve your chances of coming away with a victory is stopping McCaffrey. We know from experience, Kyle Shanahan won't give a rip if he runs the ball 40 to 50 times and throws the ball less than 10 times. We've seen it in an NFC Championship game. If he's having success with it and the defense can't stop it, Shanahan don't give a rip about being balanced. If he can run the ball and run the ball and run the ball and they're having success with it, that man will stick with it throughout the entire game. We, the Packers, have been the victims of that. We have seen that. Do I got to remind you about the Jimmy G NFC Championship game? Matt LaFleur's first year. So if you can limit, you can slow down, as tough as it may be, but if you could try to slow down and limit McCaffrey, not necessarily, in the running game, we're really focused on that, but remember, McCaffrey's a very good receiver, too, coming out of the backfield. He's a very good receiver coming out of the backfield. He's got 564 yards receiving this year. 67 catches, okay? 67 catches. Second most on the 49ers behind Brandon Ayuk, who has 75. He's got more catches than George Kittle and Deebo Samuel. So if you could try, I don't know if you can, to quote Dan Patrick in his ESPN days, you can't stop him. You can only hope to contain him. If you can try to contain him, you can try to slow him down a little bit, you're putting yourself in a position to potentially, hopefully, maybe, win this ballgame. Christian McCaffrey, target numero uno on this thing. And staying with that, be aggressive. Be aggressive on defense. Take the fight to them. If there's maybe, we talked about Trent Williams, left tackle, perhaps maybe the best left tackle in the game, one of the best for a long time in this league. If there's a little bit of vulnerability with this 49ers offense, it might be their offensive guards. So if you can expose that, you could try to use that. Kenny Clark, Devontae Wyatt, Slayton, Brooks, Colby Wooden. If those interior defensive linemen can kind of have their way on the interior offensive line with the San Francisco 49ers, generating that pressure, going at, stop it, clogging up the interior run lanes, they got a shot. And with that, when you look at some of these losses that the 49ers went through, Brock Purdy was turning the ball over. The big one was that Ravens game, and he threw 4 picks, and then everybody started to jump off the Brock Purdy train and all that. But you look at some of their other games, too. Their losses to Minnesota, Cincinnati, etc. Brock Purdy was turning the ball over. If you can generate that pressure up the middle and making it a long day for him, and you're winning in the trenches there. How many times? I mean, it's a drinking game, winning in the trenches. But if you can attack those interior offensive linemen and get that pressure up the middle, if Kenny Clark's going to go out there and have a day, you got a shot. You got a shot to slow down that running game. You got a shot to get after Brock Purdy, maybe make him a little uncomfortable, maybe make him turn the ball over. It's a risk to be an aggressive defense against a team, against an offense like the 49ers. We understand that. And if there's maybe been, I should say one, but there's been a few sticking points to Joe Barry or frustration points to Joe Barry's style of defense that Packer fans have had has been maybe not as aggressive as they would like to see. Maybe a little, you're looking at this and like, oh, he's going to play a lot of coverage, maybe some zone, and the mindset of like, we're going to force offenses to have perfect drives all the time and come away with touchdowns. Okay, you may be able to do that against some offenses, but with perhaps the best balanced offense, I don't know if that's going to work. I think you got to be a little bit more aggressive with this thing. It may burn you. What do you got to lose at this point? As Apollo Creed told Rocky Balboa in Rocky III, there is no tomorrow. You might have to just be a little bit more aggressive. Come after them a little bit more. Load up the box a little bit more. Bring that blitz up the middle. Don't let Brock Purdy be out there behind the line of scrimmage for 4 seconds, finding George Kittle and Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel. Don't do that. Speaking of which, I'm going to go to a little bit of the offensive side now here for the Packers, because we've been talking a little bit of defensive for Green Bay. When I was looking at some of the stuff last night and looking at some of their losses, Minnesota and Cincinnati and, obviously Baltimore when they blew them out and such, and, Cleveland picked up a win against them too. One thing that some of those teams did was to test the depth at the corner spot for the 49ers. Now, they got a couple of good starters, solid starters at the corner. But after the top two, there's some question marks. Maybe in that nickel spot. They got Ward. They got Lenore over there. But after that, you might be able to expose that. That's where you saw, like, the Vikings or the Bengals playing a lot of at least, 3 receiver sets and trying to test the depth of that 49ers corner position. And I think if you're Green Bay and you're looking at that as a potential weakness on San Francisco's defense, you got to be thinking we can exploit that. We've been talking about all the young receivers. Jaden Reed, Romeo, Watson's back now, Wicks. Throw in the tight ends. I think you might have to kind of maybe spread it out. Have those receiver sets 3, 4. Probably going to see a lot of 12 personnel with Green Bay again in this game. 1 back, 2 tight ends. But I think Green Bay and I think Matt LaFleur and that offense, they got to test the depth at corner. Potentially maybe a Jaden Reed type of game. You're looking at that slot. Whoever that 3rd, 4th option is going to be for a receiver, there's a way to move the ball against that. 49ers got a lot of good players on defense. A lot of good starters over there. But there might be an opportunity to test that depth a little bit at that corner spot. So maybe some 3, 4 receiver sets there and getting the ball into their playmakers that way, their young receivers that way. And with that, on the offensive side, ball control. You couldn't ask for a better drive to start a game than what Green Bay had in that Dallas game. Couldn't ask for a better one. Nearly 8 minutes, drive at 75 yards, you come away with a touchdown. You took time off the clock. You kept Dallas's offense on the sideline. You came away with a touchdown. And then also ball control, not turning the ball over. Cowboys turned the ball over. Packers didn't turn the ball over. Ball control, time of possession, winning the turnover battle. And we kind of talked about it with Brock Purdy. If you could force those turnovers, you could force him to throw some picks. Now, on the flip side of all that, winning ball control. And then I think a factor that you can't really grade, you can't dissect, there's no statistics for it, there's no rankings for it. Ride the momentum. Keep that momentum going. Got a lot of confidence with this group right now. That offense, a lot of momentum. Matt LaFleur, play calling wise, seems to be in a groove. Again, seems like he's just a step ahead of some play calls, a step ahead of the opposing defensive coordinator, trying to play a little catch up, continuing to be aggressive on the offensive side too. I think you have to be aggressive on the offensive side, but just riding that momentum, using it, staying hot. I think that's a key, or that's a way for Green Bay to go in a hostile environment against an opponent that has had a lot of success for them. Is those 5 ways. Now, the 5 ways they won't. 1, it's pretty simple. 1, you can't stop the run. You can't stop the run. Christian McCaffrey's having his way. And as we said earlier, Kyle Shanahan will have no problem whatsoever if Christian McCaffrey's averaging 6 yards per carry, 5 yards per carry, whatever. He will just run it down your throat. If he has to do it 50 times in a game, he will do it 50 times in a game. If he doesn't pass for more than 10 times, he don't care. He will do that. We've seen it. We've experienced it. If they can't stop the run, it'll be a long, long day on the defensive side and for the game overall. If defense, with that too, can't get off the field. You get in a third down situation, you get into a 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8. You can't get off the field, and the 49ers are going to continue to pick up those third downs, have a high third down percentage, win rate over there. Yeah, you ain't going to win this game. You get into a 3rd and 7, a 3rd and an 8, and you're not getting off the field in those situations, you ain't going to win this game. Turnovers, mistakes both on, defensively, for one, just pop in my head, like a Kenny Clark one where it was 3rd down. You stop him. You're off the field. Nope. Face mask on a face mask penalty you didn't have to really do. It was inadvertent probably, but still, mistakes. Can't have stupid mistakes like that. Can't have stupid penalties in a game against the 49ers. Can't do it. Can't turn the ball over. Offense can't get going. If you're turning the ball over quite a bit and you're having all those mistakes defensively, offensively, special teams, or the offense just can't get in, because of those mistakes, the offense can't get in a rhythm, can't get in a flow, you're not going to win the game. 49ers, 4th. 49ers, like the Packers, do a lot of misdirection on offense. I mean, come on now. You're talking about the Shanahan tree here. 49ers play a similar style of offense to what Green Bay does. Misdirection. Formations that look similar where a bunch of different things can come out of the same formation. We've talked about poor communication on defense more times than not. Poor communication on defense will lead to a loss in this game. The communication has to be superb on the defensive front. Whether it's Quay Walker, whether it's Darnell Savage, who Matt LaFleur said the other day, one of their best communicators, that has to be on point in this game. 49ers going to use a lot of misdirection. They're going to have a lot of creative stuff in there. A benefit for Green Bay is this defense does practice against that a lot. They've got a little bit of experience in this. The downside is that the 49ers are a little bit more experienced in this. They've got veterans in this thing. The defense has to have great communication no lack in communication. Because if they do, the 49ers will expose that, and it could get ugly. Communication has to be on point for this Packers D. And then fifth, we talked about can't stop the run with Christian McCaffrey. Fifth, George Kittle. George Kittle, again, another solid season for him. And over 1,000 yards receiving. Jake Ferguson had himself a good game against Green Bay. And I know a couple of them were in garbage time and all that, but even before that, he made some nice catches, former Badger over there. Green Bay's, at times, had some issues in, stopping opposing tight ends. George Kittle, one of the better tight ends in the league. If they're going to allow George Kittle to dominate, if they're going to allow him to go out there and rack up a bunch of yards and make some big-time plays down the field, across the middle of the field, it's going to be a long day. If him and Purdy get on that connection, who's going to be the guy to slow down George Kittle? Is it a guy like Savage? Is it a linebacker? Is it double teaming? Can you double team when you got Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel? Deebo Samuel is kind of a Swiss Army knife out there, lining up with the backfield, running the ball a little bit, passing game. But the Packers' history of struggling against tight ends could come back to bite them in this game too if they don't have success slowing him down. Special teams wise, 49ers, I was looking at, this is not a thing on here, but to kind of wrap it up, I was looking at special team stuff. And the 49ers kind of did some similar things in this offseason to the Packers, where they moved on from a veteran kicker and brought in a rookie. And they had their issues in the beginning part of the season too. And I was looking at Rick Gosselin's always does a special teams ranking every year. And 49ers, for as good as they are, top 5 offense and defense, near the bottom in special teams too. So hopefully kind of evens out here a little bit. But again, if you want to say Anders Carlson for, that might be more of a key to victory when we get to that later on. Yeah, scoring may be at a premium again in this game, but maybe slightly kind of even their special teams. I'd still take the 49ers special teams over Green Bay, though. I mean, Green Bay's ranked, if you go to Rick Gosling's rankings of special teams, Green Bay, I think, was 29 or 30, and 49ers are 22. So that's going to do it for us on this episode of the Man Cave Podcast, brought to you by our good friends from Hy-Vee and Toyson Ford. As always, big thanks for tuning into this episode, and if you wouldn't mind, click that follow and subscribe button on whatever podcasting platform you're listening to us, and 5-star rating and a positive review so others can find the podcast. Until next time, I'm Dan Casper, and I will talk to you on the next episode of the Man Cave Podcast.